Today we are meeting Todd. So can you tell us about, what kind of business are you trying to build there?
The systemic difference between Purism as a social purpose corporation and all of the other corporations you'd see, C corporations, that we actually have a social purpose first. And what this highlights is solving, paving the way to solve the topic you're bringing up of IoT devices. So my belief is that IoT devices, and you also can look at smart cars, right, all the way to self-driving cars, or any of these advancements that society is making. My approach is that all of those advancements are great. We should just do them all ethically, right? And so that's a clear line of bifurcation. For existing companies have to drive for maximizing shareholder value, which means that given a choice between gathering up more data on an individual, because that means more advertising dollars or more information that they can exploit the user for, that we as a social purpose corporation can go to the opposite end of that extreme and say we can still advance and create amazing technology, but we're going to do so entirely ethically. So that means that when we can point the finger at Google and Facebook and Apple and Microsoft, etc., and all of them are C corporations where they have a fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value. So for us, by having that systemic change, then we have a strong belief system behind what we're doing, and then we can create more and more products that actually respect individuals. So when you're talking about IoT devices, which is an area Purism plans to get into in the future, that we'll be able to create security cameras, that the user is in control, and the network is completely secured. So the device is secured, the network is secured, and the user has the keys to that network and device. And that single simple change actually comes down to we care about users' rights first and foremost, as opposed to trying to say you must have a centralized server that you log into or you pay a subscription for your camera feed. So it's an important distinction because it is the nucleus of change. So when you were talking about with Richard Stallman from Free Software Foundation, that he's had 30 some odd years of being right on the trends of where the direction of technology and the issues are coming up. And one of the things that Purism has done is adopted a number of those philosophies and applied those to security, privacy, and freedom. And so by applying those to those pillars, then we can actually solve a lot of these topics that the Free Software Foundation raises as concerns, because we're coming at it from a different perspective.
Existing IoT devices, or is it because of the business model, or it is about technology that like you said, the users will have control, you will have the keys. Mm-hmm. So what is the reason that the current IoT is like, as they say, the S in IoT stands for security. There should be a P also for privacy. The P in IoT stands for privacy. Mm-hmm. How can it be achieved, and why is it that the current breed of IoT devices don't offer that?
Oh boy, there's a lot of reasons, and so I'll kind of generalize, because at any given company could fall into a few of those and not all of them. So the generalization is that it's a race to market. So you're having a specific, let's say, niche that you're targeting. Let's say, just take security cameras as an example. And so what you're trying to do is penetrate the market and get market share, and potentially, if you're going after investment, to then, and so each of those cases, you're striving for, getting your product to market. So you're not going to care about security as much. You're going to say, we just got to get to market, we got to start selling. So the motivating factor behind all of them typically is to sell more product. A lot of it comes with additional services that you need to lock yourself into, signing terms of services that individuals might not want to agree with long term. And so I feel like it's a lot of scrambling going on, and all of the scrambling you lose on privacy protection and security, because the first and foremost is sell product, make revenue, maximize shareholder value. And so if you had, let's say an organization had enough funds, then it gets to, okay, well they could maybe make a secure device, meaning utilize network security at the bare minimum, but then they're still going to look to saying, oh, but we can extract a little extra value by, causing harm to the individual's privacy.
Right.
And so by Purism stepping into that space, and we're not going to be doing this in 2018 or 2019 maybe was the first year we were going to start looking into that. A lot of it to do with our phone coming out that we're putting a lot of effort in right now. But when we enter into the IoT space, we will be coming at it from a different perspective. And so we'll be able to have the funds, we'll be able to have enough of the focus on security, and we also care about the individuals itself. So the products that we will put out will be thought as, hey, it gives you peace of mind because you're the one protected and you're the one in control. And that peace of mind story resonates really well with an awful lot of people, because they can put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's looking to go buy a security camera. You would see a security camera that's from Google.
Right.
And then you see a security camera from Purism who respects your rights. That if all other things are equal, you would choose a security camera that respects your rights. Now, all the other things have to be equal to make that decision, because you'd have to get to the point of saying, hey, I want to go with ethical, which comes down to ease of use, convenience, which is a huge thing that we push for at Purism.
You said that if there is an option, you will choose the one which is kind of respect your privacy. But when you look at Facebook, like almost every American is a Facebook user and log into Facebook, and everybody knows that Facebook is basically harvesting everything. But still they make the choice. If you walk into any store, people are willing to give their home address, their phone number, just to get 1% discount.
Correct.
So how do you see that same people will make a conscious decision about choosing a phone that respects their privacy when they are willing to log into Facebook?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And the difference is the precursor to that, which is if all other things were equal. And primarily that's around ease of use, right? So if there were an alternative to Facebook that was just as easy to use and had 1 billion users of your friends, and you could just say, oh, good, the water's warm, I could choose between Facebook or the same exact equal version that's ethical, of course they would choose ethical. The reason that the free alternatives, let's say the ethical alternatives to Facebook, will see a challenge is because of the marketing spend of Facebook in the early days and the early adoption, and also when they were starting out, the pendulum, overall society pendulum, was so far to the right of digital rights, being stripped and completely non-existent. So people were signing up like crazy. So what we'll start to see is more of that pendulum swinging back to middle.
Right.
And as we start swinging it back to the middle, then people are going to be made aware, like, oh, you know what? I could sign up for a service. I don't have to, completely give up all of my photos and everything that I have historically, and I'm locked into that. And the terms of service are terrible. So, your example is really valid because it's highlighting that big corporations with a lot of money will be able to outmarket the small incumbents. And so one of the things that, as Purism, we have what I consider the ideal business model, is that we have a business model that has revenue, so we have leverage and we can gain leverage. Gaining leverage allows us to influence positive change upstream. So be that upstream into the supply chain for hardware, or be that upstream into services where we can start to get it. So as an example, when you're bringing up the phone or IoT devices down the line, that we can actually push, because we'll have leverage, we'll be selling hardware, and we'll utilize the margin from the hardware to release all of the software under free software licenses. And then we can advance the overall digital rights and have a product that can compete. So today, in the phone market, there is no option, right? You're either on the Apple's iOS walled garden, or you're utilizing Android. So what we're doing on the phone is we're putting out a phone that is a completely different hardware stack that allows us to run completely free software, Linux kernel and the GNU OS. And what we get on top of that is the ability for an individual to say, hey, you know what, I can have a choice now. And our choice day one, right, we're only talking about encrypted communication, right? So being able to make a phone call, SMS messaging, web browser, email, right, from that device. Then apps will continue to grow. But by creating a really core, strong offering that can expand, then we can actually influence change and start to disrupt the giants.
Canonical tried that and they did not succeed. They had like money and influence and resources. Do you think that you can really break the duopoly of Apple? And I can clearly see that there is a market for people who are researchers or security experts,
Yes.
or even lawyers, activists. There's a big market for all those people who do want it. But so is that the market you're targeting, or you're looking at average users?
So we are looking at average users. However, we know that the business model that we put together was really targeting the nucleus of the core, which are the examples you gave. And then we've already expanded to the core with our laptop sales, and the phone interest is already to that.
Okay.
And so what you can think about is it's forming a strong beachhead and then expanding. And so we've already seen some expansion, but not significant. So we have the core audience, which can still grow, and that's already millions strong, right? Then we can see that growth. So when you bring up your introduction to that question was Canonical, quote unquote, tried it. So Canonical did work on the Ubuntu Edge phone, and then of course Ubuntu Touch. There's a couple key differences, right? Was the timing. The other piece is that what they were actually looking to accomplish was really Ubuntu on a phone.
Right.
As opposed to, let's say, the 3 pillars that we stand behind. And then also, by us being a social purpose corporation, is something that really drives the belief system in what we're trying to do. We're trying to change the future. We're not just trying to put out a Linux kernel-based phone.
That was more about being able to use Ubuntu and the terminal on your phone. It was not about focus on privacy and security and more control over your own device if you wanted.
Sure. And then the other piece, of course, is that while they did run a crowdfunding campaign, I believe it was about $32 million ask, and they raised maybe 12 million. That was seen as like not enough to execute. And at that time, it was probably maybe the right amount. It was a lot more expensive to do fabrication at that time when that campaign was out. So for us, we have the ability to do all of it and more with a lot less money. A lot of that's cash management, making sure that we can execute appropriately. But it's also that it's our core, what we believe in, right? So, Canonical historically hasn't done hardware, and Purism does hardware and software. And so by bundling that together, that gets it to where, we are entirely focused on it. Right. It's not going to be something that in next quarter, I'll look at the line item and say that's not going to happen, right? So we're very, very excited about, how we can influence that change.
So when you say hardware, because most of the time what happens is that people take it from the Chinese vendors, rebrand them, or do you really design your hardware? How does it work?
So it's a split. So, and part of that process is sort of initially we went to existing ODMs for our laptop. And so in that case, we can source certain component parts.
Right.
So these are what's called public molds. So like our case is from a public mold. And that allows us to save an awful lot of money up front on tooling costs, right? Because these are very expensive tooling. And so we did a combination of utilizing existing public molds and then modifying them to our needs, such as anodizing it black, adding some after tooling, adding some cutouts for hardware kill switches. And then we also reprinted the keycaps. So that was a design change. So we have a full list of what we source versus what we modify versus what we manufacture entirely. That's for the laptops. So as an example, the motherboard is an Intel reference design that we then modify to our needs, adding hardware kill switches, rerouting certain components, adding a TPM, in some cases for some of the versions we put out where we have additional RAM slots. So we've started to gain more leverage into that space. That's all the way up through version 3. Our version 4 of our laptop that we're going to come out with probably late this year will be from schematics on up with our own industrial design and mechanical design. Part of that is because we've just grown and been able to gain leverage so we can influence more of that change. On the phone side, that is entirely us, meaning
all the way from top to bottom.
From schematic to all the EE, all the ID, industrial design, all the MD, the mechanical design, and all fabrication, PCBA, right? Everything. So we have worked with individual groups within, mostly just outside of Shenzhen, to do that fabrication. And so we've gone direct to each of those, and we're managing that entire process. So that's on the phone side, which then also we get to then replicate for laptops to come back to say, we have grown large enough where we don't need to leverage shell, case from a public mold, right? We can do our own because we have the cache to do so. So that type of growth allows us to then leverage more and more up into that supply chain.
Right. You mentioned kill switch. What is that?
So we have in all of our devices a physical switch which actually severs the circuit of webcam and microphone together. And this is going to be this is already in our laptops, and this will be in the phone as well. And then we also have a hardware kill switch that severs Wi-Fi, Bluetooth on laptops. We'll also have one on the phone. And then we're also going to have a third switch on the phone that severs all circuits, all sensors. So it severs the circuit of all the sensors that you can say, I want all my sensors off, which would be like a GPS, accelerometer, right? Even light sensors, and then you can end up toggling it back on if you want, and then you can individually select the ones you'd like to have off.
Oh, wow.
Right? And so then this removes an awful lot of these, what were previously, let's say, theoretical threats, but they move into an area that there's more and more proof that some of these, even an accelerometer can show certain things that are, privacy, let's say, privacy issues that you could encounter. And so these theoretical threats are starting to move where now they're actually being studied and tested. And so what we want to do is be ahead of that curve and say that, hey, you know what, you can toggle them off if you want to, if you're not using them, or toggle them on through a switch and then individually select them. So then we end up with a device that is truly in your control, and then you get to enable or disable the things that you'd like to do.
I mean, this is a cat and mouse game because I do cover security a bit, not too much. And last year there were reports that researchers have been able to speakers can be converted into microphones.
Yes, right.
Or just a few weeks ago, I wrote a story for Linux Pro magazine also where even if you have an air-gapped computer, it can be compromised totally, remotely. So
correct.
It's a cat and mouse game.
Well, it is a cat and mouse game, but there's also a couple of
you can
nuances because that's basically saying it's sort of binary, and it is rather nuanced. So what we do is we look at all of the potential threats, and this was where free software is the crucial piece from the software standpoint, meaning that if all the software is released and the source code's available for audit, then that paves the way for the strongest security story.
Right.
Then on top of that, then we have the ability for nuanced control. So if someone wants to have an air-gapped machine, but then they say that, okay, we have a screen that could be remotely viewed, then they could look at minimizing, basically reducing the threat surface as much as possible, and then looking to solve that one case that they're trying to solve for. So with our hardware, all from the laptops and as well as the phone, is that by releasing the schematics, releasing all of the source code, then that puts the control into the hands of, let's say, a security researcher or government that wants completely secure devices, or enterprises that say, you know what, the IT team wants to make sure that it's locked down with their keys, and all the employees make sure that they're utilizing the appropriate services, VPN, etc. And so they have the ability to mitigate and reduce their threat model down to whatever they are concerned about. And so that's the important piece about the cat and mouse game, is that if somebody's really concerned about turning speakers into a microphone, that they have the ability to disable that.
Right.
And that's not going to be for everybody, but having a platform in which they can do it is actually quite powerful.
But even if it's a cat and mouse game, at least you do have, you are chasing, otherwise without these switches, you're just sitting,
Right. So today, all the phones, I mean, they're all Qualcomm or MediaTek based, which is a concern to begin with, where the baseband's attached to the CPU, right? So the security story by definition there is that it's going to be that the service providers have direct access to the CPU.
Right.
So this is where in our device, by separating the two, then we can actually get to that point of a really strong security story.
When and why did you create Purism? What was the drive? What was the reason?
It's a lot of reasons. It has started, kind of, let's say, bubbling up for a decade as I continue to go shop for new devices and I get frustrated by what's available out there. I've been in the hardware and software space for a long time, a huge free software advocate, and so these things are concerns for me and have been for a while. A big catalyst for me was having kids, and I have 2 young daughters, and looking at the future of computing and where things were going. And me as an individual, and I think this is the case for a lot of people, especially pre-kids, right? That you're thinking about yourself. So I was willing to give up convenience for my control. But then looking at seeing, having kids, and then looking at the peer pressures, devices, how they're just, there's no IoT device that actually respects the user's rights. There's really nothing out there from phones at all. Laptops are also a concern. And what I wanted to do was actually say, you know what, I can change the future for other people, not just for myself. And so that to me was where I thought I'll open up that idea and see if there's others that are interested. And I know that I have the drive and knowledge and ability to execute in that space and have the passion toward it. And that's when I put out the crowdfunding campaign to see if other people were interested in starting Purism, basically.
Yeah, and that worked.
Yeah, yes, right, very well.
From talking to you, what I see is that you focus too much on that the company should be ethical. You should be doing the right thing. But at times, people do make wrong choices. As we talked about. Do you think that, look at the airlines industry, okay, when you board a plane, it's safe not because you trust most of the time, I don't even know it's Boeing plane or Airbus. It's actually just like Android and Apple, Boeing or, Airbus. At the same time, but what I do trust is that there are regulations, there are laws. Do you think that, regulations can also play a big role in ensuring, like Europe, GDPR is out?
Yes, yeah.
So what do you think about US? What role can?
So I think your analogy is actually fantastic, because it does show that I talk about these two worlds that we have: the physical world, where we have centuries of physical rights, and in the digital world, we don't have any. And so I'm a very strong believer that we should have digital rights, and those digital rights should be founded off of what benefits people in the society. And so these are things that when I was looking at, right, should I be more of an activist, right? I already have been an activist for decades, and it's an education process, right? And what I have to do is, as an example, is I have to educate people to say, to take your analogy, say, no, you shouldn't fly that, let's say Boeing airplane, right? Instead, you should fly a different airplane. And then you would come back to me and say, yeah, but that doesn't get me from point A to point B.
Right.
And I say, and my activist stance would say, yes, but you're giving up your rights to participate. So taking the analogy of saying that flying and there was no regulations would actually be a sort of this unethical approach, if we apply that to that analogy. So taking that same analogy forward would be that in the digital rights world, right, we have barely anything, right? So what has happened in Europe is a step in the right direction. But people need to be comfortable that when they just quote unquote board the plane, that they know that the regulations are there to protect them. And that's why it's one of the safest forms of travel. That's why people are comfortable in getting on. And so that same type of thing could happen with devices and the internet and digital rights. And this comes all the way from, anti-bullying, all the way through to just general, you having all of your privacy rights protected. As society advances more and more toward, where our online life is going to be more than our physical life, that these are going to be real concerns that need to be addressed. So what I looked at doing was, I'm going to both be an activist, as well as, I guess three things: activist, as well as work towards lobbying to make sure that regulations can be in place, and then also provide a business that can create a business that has the ability for creating products that can actually solve these problems as well. And by doing that, then I can maximize my influence on the future of computing.
So you have been doing laptop for ages, and there's as you said, there's a good market, there is a good user base. What about phone? Building a phone, hardware and software is challenging, but but the main thing is getting people to use it. Yes. So what is your strategy towards applications?
So it's similar to sort of forming a strong beachhead and then expanding. So what we know that we are not going to have all of the applications to compete head to head with Android day one or iOS. And so what we're what we're doing is we're taking an approach and have a business model behind it that allows us for incremental growth.
Okay.
So that approach allows us to put out a product, right, that focuses on just the core applications that are needed for secure and encrypted communication. So you can imagine enterprise that just simply are like, I need to be able to open up a browser, check my email, communicate, message, make phone calls. And that's the core that they need and individuals need. And that's the primary focus of what we're delivering. We actually are shipping around 350 development kits to active developers who are going to be advancing certain features. We've already heard from some of them already before we even have the dev kits out that are working off of our development documentation and emulators. So we can start to see that that's going to then expand. So if you look back on some other businesses that kind of took this incremental approach and are now world dominating, would be,
can you give example?
Yeah, would be Apple. So Apple is a prime example where initially they were very, very focused on, let's say, the creatives and graphics designers. And so so they formed a very, very strong beachhead. Now they also made really great quality product. And then, if I'm sure you remember, that initially the concern back then was, well, I can't get my Microsoft Word to run on the Mac, and so it was a evolutionary change to get to that point where now you can do everything that you would like to do on on an Apple device. And so what we need to do is solve the same exact problems and take the same incremental approach. And so that's what, and then the difference for us is, of course, we're doing it by forming a strong beachhead, by doing so ethically. And then we can advance to say, hey, we're putting out high quality products. We focus on an initial core set of applications that know that it can sell hardware. And then we can have a community of developers who all believe and have believed, right? This is decades of building up the free software world, who can then just immediately port things to an application and a hardware application that they believe in. So our app store, right, which is really going to be just a repository of applications, will continue to grow.
Right.
And taking an approach that at any point in time we are selling hardware, have enough margin to continue to grow, then that means that we actually will influence change, right? We're not going to be a flash in the pan or burn up or anything else, right? We're taking an approach of solving a problem that needs to be solved 5 years from now and 10 years from now. And that is a business model decision, which is counter to a lot of Silicon Valley type of businesses where it's a quick hit and cash out, and who cares what happens.
Right.
And that's another reason why I get that question a lot, right? It's almost like you have to have 10,000 apps or else you're going to fail, as opposed to thinking, well, actually, let's just take an incremental approach, and it's a marathon, not a sprint.
But if, you mentioned Apple, but Apple had a very, first of all, there are a couple of things that were interesting in Apple's case. One was that, as you said, they targeted graphic artists and stuff. Graphic art, or these kind of professionals, they also spend a lot of money on their hardware. I mean, I also have very high-end machine,
certainly do,
and I love that system. So first of all, there is a revenue model. It's for the users who are willing to throw money.
Yep.
Versus a lot of people in the open source community, sometimes they think that free software means free of cost software, so they're not willing to pay for it, number one. Number two is that Google Chrome is a good use case where they targeted a very niche audience. There was nothing, with Chrome you get to do less that you can do on your Linux machine. But it succeeded, it's working. So what is I'm sorry I take a lot of time to build the foundation, so that there is a context, So what is your core audience? First of all, who's willing to pay? And second is that there's a niche that, whatever you're offering, they're happy with that. And, even if they don't get Word for 2 years, they don't mind.
So there's kind of two parts to that question. The first piece is that everybody understands you have to pay for hardware because it's a physical good. And so by having a business model that sells hardware and services and releases everything under free software and has an ethical approach even at our in our articles of incorporation, then we gain the respect and the community behind what I very strongly believe in. So that's one key piece, is that everybody understands you have to pay for hardware. So a phone, you understand you have to pay for the hardware of a phone. So that means we have a business model that can actually compete against the giants, as opposed to, let's say, just simply a free software
Right.
service where you're trying to take it in on donations,
Mm-hmm.
right? That will never have the financial leverage to compete against the giants. So you just, by definition, are relegated to the people who care about those topics, which is going to be a smaller market.
Right.
So, so that's the first part. The second part is by forming a really strong, very, very strong core audience who are dedicated to advancing and solving this problem, yet having a business model that can actually compete, right? I can stand on solid ground and point at Google and Apple and Microsoft and Facebook and everybody else in that C Corp world, and say that's not the best approach that's going to help users. And by having that major differentiator, they're all going to, all of those in the C Corp world will market like crazy that they protect your privacy, or we've modified our privacy rights, or right, because they see that the pendulum's swinging away from there. So it's going to be a lot of marketing heavy that we're going to be competing with. But by having such a strong, solid base that for them to actually compete head to head, they would need to release all their software, actually change their corporation status to something that actually is meaningful for the social good. And so that gives us a major differentiator where we can continue to grow and influence change. And then this also gets to the point of, when you're bringing up Chrome OS, the areas that they've seen success is an area that we would be able to target down the line, because we can get to lower cost products as well. The last point that I think you raised was about graphics designers willing to pay, meaning to pay for a premium. So we sell high quality hardware and a premium, and we already are selling and seeing growth in that space. And that's because we don't just focus on only free software advocates. Free software is the core for the areas of privacy rights and the areas of security. So security is a huge area that we've seen growth in. These are CTOs, CIOs, CSOs, who all sit in a room with your executives. And the executives will have a story of, we can't have a major data breach, right? Because major data breaches can be company threatening. And so they're tasking the technical people to say, we need to lock down our devices, right? We need to lock down our customer service devices, right? Because they have access to all the customer data. So how do we go about doing that? And Purism continues to pop up as the means, because we actually just recently announced our tamper-evident laptops, which means a single bit change can be flagged as, hey, that's been modified. So it means it can flag to any type of ransomware or malware or any remote access Trojan that tries to hit the system. So being able to advance that security story also helps with enterprise. And as you can imagine, enterprise sales is a huge area with security. So this all gets back to, while we care about ethics and free software is the nucleus and sort of that foundation to have a credible story in security. Anybody else, right? If someone's trying to make a security-based Android phone, right? In the security world, they just get laughed out of the room, right? Because it's so hard to make, to actually lock that down. Which is also why security firms, even if they're using Android now, are looking to have it be on our hardware, where they can just swap out the Android and put in a Linux kernel, but still use whatever system they have on top. Be that, let's say, like Elo or even Copperhead, or right, these other types of things. Ubuntu Touch is another example, right, where it's currently an Android core, but that can get swapped out on our hardware with a Linux kernel, and then we can actually advance that security story tremendously.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so yeah, that's what there should be some core audience, and then you can expand beyond that, because that's what. Because I don't think you can really target everybody, because it's really hard.
So we have a pretty clear business plan to begin with, which was we want to have a product that can reach everybody. But we know unless we went out and raised hundreds of millions of dollars, that we wouldn't be able to solve all of those problems and hit that entire market day one.
Right.
We knew we had to increment there, and so the approach we took, which is pretty simple, it's based off of my entire belief system of saying, let's target security, privacy, and freedom, the nucleus of that, of course, is free software. And the more that we can make available and transparent, the stronger the security story. That has a really strong business model, and the beachhead we've already formed and are already starting to expand in is around those three pillars,
right?
Privacy, security, and freedom. And then what happens is the audience beyond that, because you realize these are also the tastemakers, these are the influencers, right? CTOs, CIOs, CSOs, software developers. These are the people who the average users will be asking, what phone should I get, right? What laptop should I get, right? You probably get asked that regularly. And so you provide the recommendation based off of, what's going to be the best for that individual. And if you start to see that, oh, well, I can provide a Librem laptop or a Librem 5 phone, and they can do everything they want to, but they're completely protected, that's a huge market and huge amount of difference that we can make. The last point I'll make there is that we actually have seen growing amount of interest from parents, which is actually why one of the reasons I started Purism was to say phones should respect the individuals and respect the kids in this case. And so parents who are trying to figure out the future of computing and what online bullying and social media and what can they provide their kid and how much data is being gathered on their child, as a parent and provider, it's a growing concern. And as you can imagine, that market is starting to grow for us, which is one that I would consider well outside the core, right? And so those are some examples of where we'll start to see kind of these large areas of growth down the beach, and then we'll start to advance into the, let's say, into the city of average users.
Do you remember a few weeks ago Facebook announced Facebook for kids, children?
I'm not aware of
something.
that.
Yeah, it was like criticized, but it was for kids also.
I do think I remember hearing about that. Just very briefly.
And and to be honest, I don't want to contradict you, but there are a lot of people who themselves are not tech savvy.
That's right.
They're intimidated, so they are willing to hand over those kind of toys to their kids, because when their kids play with that, they feel that their kid is a techie. If you can swipe an app on your iPhone or iPad, oh, my kid is a techie. So
I don't think that contradicts. I think that if anything, that bolsters what I'm saying.
No, sometimes the parents, there are, parents who are aware, but at the same time, there are a lot of parents who are not aware of the privacy risk.
Right, and so I think that
VTech toys, they get VTech toys, and they're infamous for, they have webcams in their toys, and they're stealing not stealing, but nobody's paying attention to security, so it was getting harvested.
Yes.
So
I agree with you, and I think that what you're highlighting is the long-term story.
Exactly.
Is that what we need to do is make it where ethical products are seen as the comparable, right? So just as easy to use, but fully respect your rights. And so then an individual, right? And so yes, Facebook can come out with Facebook for Kids, or they could come out with secure Facebook, or whatever they try to market. And like I said, it's all just marketing, and of course they have billions to spend on marketing and trying to change that influence. But at the end of the day, a lot of people, and we don't even need the majority, but we just need a lot of people to start to be made aware that, you know what, that's still a C corporation. Their entire business model is to extract as much information about you as possible and exploit you as an individual. And that cannot change unless it's a systemic change from Facebook, which is not going to happen until they start to see a huge decline and realize, how can we survive? And I also believe that will happen because it's just so easy to switch. Even when they have all your data locked up. The data before, right, the stickiness of a user was stickier a decade ago. Now, so much data is just temporary. That the ability to switch to something else is so much easier now, and that also has the giants, scared. So the long-term future, I think, is by providing something and we can stand on solid ground to say what we're actually doing is protecting the individual and making sure the user is in control, and in this case, the child is in control, or the parents are in control of their family
if they want to.
Right, and that allows for the people who, let's say, are in the know, these people who recommend devices. So let's say if you go talk to a school counselor, and the school counselor says, hey, we should use this product, that will start to be introduced more and more into that conversation. And then people can start making educated decisions. And I actually believe that this, as I described, this overall pendulum has swung so far to the right of digital rights invasion that as it's swinging back, we get to be seen and pointed to as the opposite end of that, right? And so if the pendulum swings all the way back to center, we'll be completely happy because we'll at least then users will have a choice. If it swings farther, all the way back to, let's say, the far left side of that pendulum, where we have solid regulation, to help making sure that users who don't know that all their private data, can't be retained for a long time. Data retention policies, right, and other types of regulation that would be smart.
And the most interesting thing is, as I was talking to Richard Stallman, and we actually discussed before that also that telling that don't use this device because, I mean, as you said, just make that sacrifice, don't board on plane. But here at least you're creating an option. So even if there is a drive to make people aware, so you can, just the way we tell our kids, okay, you can either take a shower or bath. We're not saying, do you want to take a shower or not? So there is at least an option.
Yes.
And that option is also not really the poorly written option where, okay, you will have to make so many compromises to use it. It's fully, full-blown option.
That's
so
right.
if you want,
That's right.
if there's an awareness drive or if there are regulations,
Yes.
so there is something that people can go back to.
Yeah, that's right. So
at the same time, I also feel that it's kind of also future-proofing in a way that if push comes to shove and people do need, I mean, I was watching Black Mirror, and
Yes.
extreme cases are there. So people, if they do want, there is an option. They won't have to unplug themselves from the matrix.
Yes, that's right. So you're highlighting two really important parts about Purism. So we stand for convenience and control. So what we do is we provide convenient products that give the user control. And that hasn't been done before. And so by us doing that means that if you have a convenient option, then all of the advocates, which I am one of them, can point to that and say, actually here, I'll just hand you a phone, use this, and then you can go, great, I can now participate in digital society, but I can do so where I know that I have peace of mind that I'm, not being a product or being, manipulated, and I have control. And so this analogy that I like to provide about advancing toward, let's say, right now we have these devices that are external to us, and then pretty soon it'll be we're starting to already read some internal like biometrics, and then it'll start to get embedded, right? And so we can actually control, right? Let's say your heart, and so monitoring it. There's already devices that are computers, right? That can provide an electrical shock to your heart. And so these are things that, as we advance in technology, these are going to get closer and closer and closer to our brain. And so I asked the theoretical question that in the future, when you can choose a brain embeddable device that can be surgically implanted and it can read and write the electrical signals of your brain, which means it can read and write your thoughts, and it can insert memories, right? Record everything from your optics. What company would you like that to come from, right? Would that be Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, right? The list is none of those, because they're all C corporations, which are going to try and maximize profit, maximize shareholder value, which means to try and utilize everything they can and insert whatever they can into your brain. And Purism, as a social purpose corporation, has the ability to say, we would have you control your own brain. So the difference is, it does come down to control. The future corporations are all going to be vying to control the user more and more and more, and we're going to fight against it. But the primary way in which we can succeed is by making the products convenient. And so your example of saying that you could give up some convenience, or you could choose ways you brought up, like Richard Stallman, who stated, I just choose not to use it, right? Individually, that's what I choose as well, right? I choose not to use services that exploit me. So if I have to read a terms of service, I will not sign up for the service, or create a sock puppet account or something to temporarily use that service. And so that's inconvenient. So I choose to be inconvenienced, and I don't think that everybody should. And so that's, again, back to having kids and seeing the future, that we need to have easy to use products that are convenient, but then that gives control back to the individual so that they aren't manipulated.
You keep saying C#, but there are some companies like Red Hat, for example. It's a C#,
C Corp, yeah.
C Corp. They're not kind of evil per se. While I do agree with your thoughts, fully that those companies, their primary goal is to kind of
Yes, it is.
But at the same time, there are companies that may be.
Oh, sure. It doesn't by definition mean that you're a bad corporation. I mean, as a matter of fact, Purism, we could be a C corporation and
still be good.
Yes, and my belief system would be the thing that carries it. So in the case of Red Hat, that they have made a lot of, there's some really amazing advancements. I know a bunch of people at Red Hat, and with specifically with GNOME Foundation and a bunch of other advancements. So Red Hat, I don't put into that camp of being a malicious, across the board, as I do all those other examples. But that's because not because that they're a C corp. It's because of their management decisions and other things that they have done that at least are trending in the right direction. And so the other piece is that also they have a business model. Right.
It has nothing to do with
It has nothing to do with data gathering, right? It's simply a subscription. So there's plenty of businesses that let's say fall outside when you're outside of data,
right?
And you're outside of services, and you're providing, in their case, business to business licenses for software, and then they contribute back to the free software world. Right. That's a perfectly fine business, and also they're not put in a position. But let's just say that if they were put in a position where they could install a backdoor and it would maximize shareholder value, their board of directors and the executives would have to look at those two and say, well, being paid to put in a backdoor maximizes shareholder value, and so we have a fiduciary duty to do so. So they could then try and weigh the ethics of it, but in the end of the day, shareholders could sue them for not maximizing their shareholder value, and that's a real threat. I mean, that happens, right? It's not a theoretical threat, that happens. And so Purism, why we formed as a social purpose corporation is so then all investors, any shareholders, anybody involved at executive level, the board of directors, we all have to look at the ethics first.
Right.
And say, what's going to benefit users and their digital rights first and foremost. And in our case, if we're given that choice, backdoor or not, we would have to. We have a fiduciary duty actually to avoid putting in any backdoor, even if it were to increase our revenue, because it's sort of the first litmus test is digital rights for users.
I will once again go back to the airplane analogy, and that is that yes, their shareholders will want but to just put cheap food, just get food from China or Mexico or India, but they can't do that, because there are laws and regulations, and there will be massive fines, that they will go out of business. So while it is nice to have one Purism, but there can't be. And at the same time, on the other side of the spectrum, it's nice to have Red Hat. But in this space, as you mentioned earlier, the point that, the reason I asked was that I just wanted to stress the point that you made earlier, that we need the same kind of rights in digital world also.
Yes, I agree, exactly.
So we just need, just the way we have road signs and traffic signs and all those laws. We need the same thing. I mean, that will ensure, doesn't matter whether you're a social purpose corporation or C corporation.
That's right. So
that
this is
will
where
also, kind of, they can't, even if you want, no matter if you're Google or Facebook, you just can't, because law doesn't allow. So this is where I believe that there's a number of three-pronged approach that I take. So personally, I advocate. You have been doing it for a long time.
And so that's part number one, right? The advocates out there are great. The second piece is I do believe that we should have digital laws that respect the digital world, because it crosses over to the physical world. And so in the physical world, right, we've had so many centuries of laws and precedent. And we can take a lot of those laws and precedent and apply them to the physical world, which includes law enforcement being made aware of that. If somebody calls up, I give the analogy of if you put a physical camera on your kitchen and a kitchen window, right? Or excuse me, somebody else comes up and puts a physical camera on the kitchen window, and you're in the room and you see that there's a camera spying on your kitchen. You would immediately call the authorities, and the authorities would come out and say, "Oh, look, somebody was trespassing. There was a camera put in, which is peeping Tom laws," and then they take that. So you'd have a criminal case opened. It would possible that they would be arrested if they could find who the individual was, and charges would be pressed, right? So the whole process would come full circle. In the digital world, you're carrying around a camera that can be lit up anytime by anybody involved in the tech stack, be that from Google to the ISP and your microphone and your data. You just by signing a terms of service, you've agreed to give everything to Facebook, right, or Uber or whomever, right? And so by signing the terms of service, you just give it all up, and you're willing to. You're not going to read the terms of service. Most people don't.
You can't.
Right?
It's so long.
You're right, and you would never sign up for anything. And so then you end up, you just basically accept, and then you use the service thinking it's good for you. It's fine. And the reason you think that is because in the physical world we have all these rights. In the digital world you don't, and so they're just being exploited all over the place. So that second point is lobbying, right? And as Purism grows, we'll actually be able to lobby and say, hey, you know what? These are the things that we'd like to see. And then the third piece of that is being a social purpose corporation means that we can stand on solid ground and point to saying, hey, we're doing it the right way. This is the way we'd like it to be for society. And so we can try to influence change by lobbying, but also we can influence change by just being what we'd like to see.
Okay, so I think we kind of covered we talked for almost an hour, and we covered a broad range of topics about the company, the Purism, and we also talked about kind of ideal society where not only people like you, we need more entrepreneurs like you who are driving that kind of business model, plus maybe some help from the administration and governments also to make laws.
Yes.
But awareness also plays a big role, where people themselves are aware of what is the right thing. So I think we covered a broad range of topic, and once again, thanks for coming over and chatting today.
Oh no, I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's been fantastic.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.